My name is Evelyn Thompson, and I've reached my 7th decade. After many years spent cleaning other people's houses, I finally decided I deserved to retire. But on that fateful day when I shared my desire to retire with my son, he gave me a look as if I had just uttered utter nonsense. I just couldn't believe my ears. My own son, whom I had fed and raised, replied in an icy tone, "Who's going to pay the bills?" I never thought that the words of my own son could cause me such pain, as if inflicting a deep wound. He stated that I couldn't afford the luxury of idleness, that old people like me were only good for being useful. My heart was breaking, and I didn't sleep a wink all night. Memories of sleepless nights spent by his bedside, of every meal prepared, of every shirt ironed, flashed through my head, and all for what? To hear this? The next morning, I got up before dawn, as usual, but something inside me had broken. I felt empty, like a shadow in my own home. While he and his wife were animatedly discussing plans to renovate the kitchen, I silently washed the dishes, like a voiceless servant. Not a single thank you, not even a simple how are you, only curt orders, cold demands, and contempt in every word. My old age had become a burden to them, a walking problem they dreamed of getting rid of. But that night, as I hunched over, silently sweeping the long hallway, something snapped inside me. And then I made a vow to myself. This would be the last time anyone dared to humiliate me for being old. I would become an invisible shadow, yes, but not a useless one. And when they least expected it, I would teach them a lesson they would remember for the rest of their lives. The next morning, I got up before everyone else, as I always did. Prepared breakfast, scrubbed the kitchen until it shone, left everything ready before they deigned to crawl out of their beds. My son, in that same icy tone, barely muttered through his teeth, "It's about time." And when his wife saw the steaming coffee, she didn't even deign to look at me. I just nodded silently, swallowing the lump of resentment stuck in my throat. The pain no longer stung so sharply. I was gradually becoming invisible in their home, getting used to being simply ignored. While collecting dirty cups, I unintentionally overheard a fragment of their conversation. My son was saying that they would have to make some cuts, that life was now prohibitively expensive, and that it would be just wonderful if I, the old wreck, started contributing more money to the family budget. They were making me feel not just like a burden, but like a walking ATM, a source of eternal problems and financial difficulties. As if I hadn't given them everything I had, down to the last penny. Every cent that I earned in this life went to their well-being, and now they were paying me with contempt. That same day, without uttering a word, I headed to the nearest farmer's market. My gaze caught on a sign, "Kitchen assistant needed." Without hesitation, I went in. The place was modest, but the owner, a good-natured man with graying hair, listened to me with genuine attention. I told him about my experience working in homes, about cooking, about serving families. He offered me a job without hesitating for a second. "Here, we don't look at age, Evelyn Thompson," he said with a smile. A warmth spread through my chest that I hadn't felt for years. That evening, I returned home with a firm decision. If they want me to work, I will work. But not for them, but for myself. This time, every step I take will be for my own sake. Enough supporting these parasites. Every penny earned will be an instrument for restoring my dignity. And I'm not going to warn them about anything. They'll find out when it's too late. In silence, as if sneaking, I began a new life. Not a word to anyone. Under the cover of early morning, under some innocent pretext, I slipped out of the house and walked to the diner. At first, my legs ached from the unfamiliar exertion, my hands trembled in time with the clattering kitchen, but inside, a long-forgotten feeling was kindling. Pride. Pride in being my own boss again, in earning my own living, without asking anyone for handouts. Walter, the owner, treated me with respect. Always called me by my full name, Evelyn Thompson, and, noticing my fatigue, offered me a seat. The young employees, full of energy, watched my work ethic with surprise. One of them once blurted out, "You work harder than half of my family." I just smiled mysteriously in response. If they knew the price I was paying for this strength, if they knew that I was doing all this with a broken heart, they wouldn't believe it. While I silently washed mountains of dishes, my son probably thought I was still whiling away the days with soap operas and sweet buns. From time to time, he would ask solicitously if I wasn't planning on looking for something decent, completely unaware that I was already working. He didn't know that this job was my chance at a new life. Because it was in this diner that I was waiting for a meeting that would turn everything upside down. That evening, as I was fiddling with boxes in the diner's back room, Walter approached me. His words were like a bolt from the blue. "Evelyn Thompson, we need to talk. There's someone who wants to meet you. Says you saved his life many years ago, and he's never been able to thank you." I froze, as if struck by lightning. Who was it? My intuition screamed that this was no mere coincidence. When Walter said someone from the past was eager to meet, my first impulse was to run, to hide. Fear gripped me. Fear of the shadows of the past, which I had buried under the weight of years, work, silence, and self-sacrifice. But something in his pleading look stopped me. "He's been waiting out there for an hour. Didn't want to leave until he'd spoken to you," he added. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and stepped out of the diner. A man was sitting at one of the tables. A gray suit fit him impeccably, his beard was well-groomed, and his eyes, they seemed to be searching for something lost in me. Noticing me, he jumped up and took off his hat. "You're Evelyn Thompson. You may not remember me, but I'll never forget you." His voice was soft and respectful, but there was a tremor of excitement in it. He looked at me as if I were not just a person, but something more. At first, I didn't recognize him, but as soon as he said his name, something seemed to flip in my chest. It was the same young man who, more than 30 years ago, was collecting cardboard in the neighborhood where I worked. I remembered once sharing a hot meal with him, nursing him when he fell ill with a fever, and taking him to the hospital when others shunned him as if he had the plague. "You were the only one who saw a human being in me," he said, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Now I have my own company, and I'm looking for people like you, honest, hardworking, dedicated." I was speechless. Warmth spread through my chest, mixed with surprise and a sense of some higher justice. He offered me a job at his company, cleaning offices with decent pay, health insurance, and a flexible schedule. But his last words truly stunned me. "If you ever need help, please don't hesitate to ask. You saved my life, and I will always be in your debt." It was at that moment that I realized fate itself had placed an incredibly powerful trump card in my hands. That night, I returned home, my legs aching with fatigue, but my heart burning with hope. While my son and his wife bickered, choosing which series to watch, I, as usual, bustled in the kitchen, preparing dinner. No one cared about me, no one asked how my day had gone, whether I needed help. To them, I was nothing more than part of the furniture, an old woman who should be grateful for the corner provided. They had no idea what was going on in my soul. As I washed the dishes, the man's words, his offer, swirled in my head. A decent job, a real salary, and, most importantly, respect. For the first time in years, someone had offered me something without humiliating me or demanding anything in return. And even though I already had a job with Walter, this meeting felt like a sign, like a door opening to a new life. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat in the living room alone, gazing at the dark silhouettes of the houses in my neighborhood. And suddenly it dawned on me, for the first time in a long time I had a choice. I didn't have to live out my days collecting scraps from the master's table, thrown to me by my own son. I could change everything in an instant, without asking anyone for approval. It wasn't too late. At 65, I suddenly realized, old age is not a sentence, but a long-awaited freedom. The next day, when my son, as always, came to ask for money for urgent repairs on his perpetually breaking down car, I calmly cut him off. "No more. I won't give it to you." His face twisted with anger. "Egotist." "Heartless," he spat out, but I just smiled in response. While he screamed, I kept a secret that would turn his world upside down. For the first time in years, control was in my hands. The next day, I made the final decision. I took the job at the company of the man who never forgot my kindness. He personally greeted me, led me to the table to sign the papers, and introduced me to everyone as the woman who had changed his life. I was given a new uniform, a badge with my name on it, and a cozy corner where I could rest during breaks. Yes, it was cleaning, but it also came with respect, which I hadn't felt even in my own home. I tasted life again. No longer just a silent mother, cooking food and cleaning up after everyone. Now I am Evelyn Thompson, a woman who honestly earns a living and knows her worth. My boss, that kid who used to collect cardboard, treated me with a tender care my own children never showed. He said that the moment I felt tired, I could retire peacefully, and he would personally ensure I wanted for nothing. But I didn't want handouts, I craved justice. Every blessed day, I set aside a portion of my honestly earned money. I opened a secret bank account, and every peso saved felt like a small victory. It was my personal way of preparing for the inevitable explosion because I knew that sooner or later, my son would realize I was no longer useful to him, and that along with me would go the very mattress that had always supported him so reliably. One evening, at dinner, he cast an icy glance at me that sent shivers down my spine. "You've been quiet lately. I hope you're not hiding anything from me," he asked, his question like a lash. I met his gaze with my own, full of determination and calm. "The only thing I'm hiding is the remnants of my patience," I replied in an even but firm voice. He said nothing in response, but I felt that for the first time in years, he realized that something inside me no longer belonged to him, that I was no longer the submissive mother he was used to seeing. In his eyes, a shadow flickered, fear or annoyance, I couldn't tell, but one thing was clear, the mask of impunity was beginning to slip from his face. Slowly, as if shedding shackles, I began to free myself. Breakfasts were a thing of the past. The mountain of dirty clothes scattered by my son and his wife no longer stirred me to action. Plates, abandoned forlornly in the living room, awaited their fate. At first, they were silent, whispering behind my back. "What's wrong with her? Is she sick? Depressed?" they must have thought. But no. I had simply stopped being their shadow, their silent servant. And with each task abandoned, with each minute reclaimed, I felt that part of me that had dissolved between frying pans, rags, and oppressive silence returning to me. My son began to show impatience. Irritation crept into his voice. "What's going on? Why are you so distant?" I merely shrugged evasively, unwilling to engage in pointless arguments. The words of his wife reached me as if from afar, full of venom and contempt. "She's no longer needed, useless." But instead of the usual outburst of anger, a quiet, triumphant smile was born within me. Each of their insults became further proof, they were losing their power over me. And at work, oh, there I blossomed. There I felt needed, valued. I eagerly learned to use the computer, sent my first emails, feeling like a pioneer. A young colleague, with genuine willingness, taught me how to use banking apps, to read contracts. In his eyes, I saw respect and belief in my abilities. My mind flared with new strength, like a long dormant lamp, illuminating every corner of my consciousness. With each new piece of knowledge, I felt the burden of years receding, giving way to a sense of freedom. One evening, returning home, I accidentally overheard my son's phone conversation. His words, like an icy dagger, pierced my heart. "If this continues, I'll put her in a nursing home. She's no longer needed, just creates problems." I froze at the threshold, unable to move. Not a sound, not a tear escaped me. Only one thought, like an oath, echoed in my head: "You won't get the chance. Before you decide to get rid of me, I'll leave myself, and you'll be left with nothing." That night, I began to develop a plan for my escape. Every free moment I dedicated to organizing my departure. I studied rental offers, consulted with financiers, meticulously writing everything down in an old notebook that I hid deep in the closet, like a military secret. It was no longer just a plan but a declaration of silent war. I will leave this house, but not empty-handed. I will take with me every penny I have suffered for, patiently enduring all the grievances. I understood that I needed to act cautiously, gradually. They depended on me far more than they realized. I paid the utility bills, bought groceries, quietly covered their minor expenses that they didn't even notice. My role was more than just a mother. I was their support, their silent guardian angel, and it was time for them to realize this. My son still considered me a burden, unaware that I was the load-bearing wall of this house. Should I leave, everything would collapse like a house of cards. One Saturday, while his wife was grumbling that I had stopped ironing her dresses, I rejoiced inwardly. This week, secretly from them, I opened an account in another bank and transferred all my savings there. I took out a small loan to strengthen my emergency fund. For the first time in my life, I had something of my own, untouchable. That night, before going to bed, I looked intently in the mirror. Wrinkles lined her face, shadows of fatigue lay under her eyes, and her hands were rough from work. But her gaze. A spark had rekindled within it, not of pride, no, but of freedom. After so many years of obedience, I am finally straightening my shoulders. And when they realize it, it will be too late. The day of my departure was unusually sunny. I rose before dawn, prepared a modest breakfast, and left everything in perfect order, as if it were a normal day. My son and his wife left without saying goodbye, as usual. They couldn't have imagined that it was the last time they would see me in that kitchen. With a firm heart and without a single tear. I gathered only the essentials, my belongings, documents, everything I had managed to save, and, of course, my self-respect. I called a taxi, and now I stand before a small house rented in my name, in a quiet neighborhood. Modest, yes, but mine. Here, no one will raise their voice at me, no one will tell me what to do. Stepping over the threshold, I fell onto the bed and wept. But these were not tears of sorrow, but of relief. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely, without feeling like an outsider in my own life. Time moved slowly, and soon my phone was filled with messages. Where are you? Why aren't you home? What happened? I didn't answer any of them. Not out of fear, but because they didn't deserve any explanations. I am not a runaway teenager, but a woman who, tired of being treated like an object, decided to live with dignity, even in solitude. That night, in the ringing silence, I made myself a cup of tea, wrapped myself in a warm blanket, and looked out the window. No one called me mom, no one asked me to wash a glass or iron a shirt. But this silence didn't hurt. On the contrary, something more powerful than pain was born within me, peace. And this peace, so hard-won, I will no longer let go. No more than 3 days passed before they became agitated, as if I had suddenly become vital to them. The phone was ringing off the hook with calls and messages, and even the neighbors relayed that my son had come, asking if they knew where I was. Suddenly, an invisible, insignificant woman had turned into an indispensable one. But I didn't lift a finger, let them learn to live without the one who solved everything for them. The surprise wasn't that they were looking for me, but when it happened, right on the day the bills for electricity, gas, and groceries were due. I vividly imagined their faces when they discovered the empty pantry and unpaid bills, when they realized that there was no more mountain of clean clothes and hot dinner waiting for them on the table. That's when it finally dawned on them how much I had done in silence. But it was too late. My son left a voice message. There was a strained, almost tender note in his voice. Mom, we just want to know that you're okay. Come home. Yeah, right, I chuckled to myself. It wasn't love, but pure necessity. I imagined his wife, disgustedly scrubbing the dirty bathtub or, for the first time in her life, cooking dinner, which, of course, would be hopelessly oversalted. And this thought brought me a malicious, but so sweet, satisfaction. Their power had fallen, and I, sheltered in my quiet corner, watched this spectacle with delight. That night, sinking into the softness of my new bed, I remembered my mother's words, spoken on her deathbed, "He who doesn't cherish you when you're near doesn't deserve even your shadow from afar." And how right she was. No more begging for love, no more justifying my existence. I had found freedom, and its taste was especially sweet because those who had once despised me were now begging for my return. Weeks dragged on, and my silence became increasingly eloquent. They continued to press, but anger was already breaking through the mask of decency. The tone of their messages changed. "We miss you" turned into a furious, "How could you abandon us like this?" Even my son, my own son, dared to accuse me of irresponsibility, of leaving him in a difficult moment. As if I owed him something. As if my fatigue, my burnt-out heart meant nothing. One day, the neighbor called, her voice trembling with laughter. They hired a cleaning lady. A young one. But she didn't last a week. She says they don't like anything, and they also want her to work for them for free. A pang of pity stirred in my heart for that girl, but I couldn't hide my triumph. Finally, they understood the value of my love, the generosity they had taken for granted for so long. And me? I continued to work, not hanging my head. I settled into my new place, even taking overtime with joy. Money no longer slipped through my fingers like water. Now I held it tight, felt control, saw a purpose. Every coin was mine, only mine, and intended for my own, carefully constructed plans, not for paying for someone else's whims. One evening, leaving work, I froze in front of a travel agency window. A bright poster shouted, "Packages for seniors. See the ocean for the first time." And I, mesmerized, stared at the image of sand and azure waves. I had never been on a plane in my life, and suddenly, for the first time, a daring thought flashed through my mind: why not? If they could live without me, so could I, even better. After that evening at the travel agency, a volcano seemed to erupt inside me. I came home, took out my old notebook, and started calculating. And you know what? I could afford it. This wouldn't just be a vacation, but a real triumph. A journey conceived not as an escape from the past, but as a sincere thank you to myself for the courage to break free. No longer a sacrificial mother, but a free woman, the rightful mistress of her own life. I resolutely went to the agency and booked a tour to the coast. 5 unforgettable days by the ocean, with all-inclusive meals and a hotel with breathtaking views of the endless water. While paying, the girl at the counter smiled and remarked, "I admire you, Evelyn Thompson. Not everyone your age decides to travel alone." I just smiled mysteriously in response. After all, I wasn't alone, I was with myself. And after years of neglecting myself, disguised as caring for others, it was more than enough. When I finally got to the coast and felt the fresh breath of the sea breeze, tears streamed from my eyes. But these were not tears of sadness, but of long-awaited relief. Each wave crashing on the shore seemed to wash away the burden of the past, cleansing my soul. I remembered all those moments when I pushed my own desires into the background to please others. Every sacrifice made for those who didn't even bother to say thank you. And now, standing before the vast, azure ocean, I let go of all the grievances, forgave myself. My soul, as if embracing me, whispered a promise, never to push myself to the background again. During these days, I deliberately ignored calls and didn't check messages. I cut myself off from the hustle and bustle of the world to reconnect with my true self. I wandered along the silky sand, enjoyed the exotic flavors of new dishes, and even danced in the square to live music. And one starry night, sitting on the shore, looking into the bottomless blackness of the ocean, I suddenly realized, it doesn't matter when you decide to start, any time is perfect to start living for real. Returning home, I felt reborn. My hair, tousled by the sea wind, held its salty kiss. My skin, touched by a golden tan, breathed sunshine. And my soul soared, light and free as never before. For the first time, I decided to post a photo from the beach on my personal profile. In it, I was smiling, and behind me stretched the majestic ocean. No sooner than 2 hours had passed when a message came from my son. "Is that all? Who paid for this trip for you? No warm, you look great, no sincere, I'm happy for you. Only suspicion, control, eternal distrust." I didn't answer. I simply left his message unread. Because I realized, my happiness only causes them irritation and anxiety. I was valuable to them only when I was broken, compliant, ready for any sacrifice. My inner strength, my freedom, it wounded their ego. I became a living reproach, proof of their inadequacy. They no longer need my help for happiness, and I, it turns out, can exist without them. That same evening, full of despair, his wife sent me a voice message. Sobbing, she complained about their terrible situation. They had been fired, and they were on the verge of losing their car. She begged for help, even a little, for the well-being of their family. It took me a couple of seconds to make a decision. Not a word in response. I simply deleted the audio, because through every tear I felt the familiar taste of manipulation. I wasn't going to fall into that trap anymore. From that moment on, I noticed a change in their behavior. No more demands, only pleas. But it was too late. I had been there all my life, and they stubbornly didn't notice me. And now, when I finally shone on my own, they wanted to bask in the rays of my light. But the door was closed. Locked tight. And I threw away the key. Several days of silence, until one Saturday morning there was a knock at my door. My son stood before me, and his face was so fake, as if he had been rehearsing this role for years. In his hands he held a bouquet of cheap flowers, and a strained, unnatural smile was frozen on his lips. Behind him loomed his wife, carrying a box of cookies, as if it were a symbol of truce. I was silent, staring intently at them through the narrow slit of the ajar door. Not a sound, not a movement. "Mom, we just wanted to talk," he said, and the words that used to warm my heart now sounded like an empty sound. "We thought maybe we could have lunch together, like in the good old days," added his wife, smiling timidly. I shook my head, and there wasn't a shadow of a doubt in my eyes. "Like in the good old days? Before you called me a burden? Before you decided to send me to a nursing home?" My voice was calm, but firm. "I have other plans today," I said, and slammed the door with such determination that the walls seemed to shake. No shouting, no reproaches, just one gesture speaking louder than any words. That day, I went to the park with my favorite book tucked under my arm. I found a secluded spot under an old tree and immersed myself in reading, watching life unfold around me. I took deep breaths of fresh air, feeling light and free. No more obligations, no more tension. That day, I felt like I had turned the most painful page of my life. I was no longer the broken woman living in anticipation of crumbs of attention and love. I had become whole, strong, with clearly defined boundaries and untouched dignity. And that feeling was wonderful. That night, the phone screen lit up with a final message from my son. "I understand. We've lost you, but don't say we didn't try." The words stung, but I simply swiped my finger, erasing the message into oblivion. No, they didn't lose me. I had finally found myself. In that very moment, the truth struck me like lightning. True love is not the greedy embrace you expect from others, but the generous gift you learn to give yourself when there is only emptiness around. Days flowed by, carrying away the noise and bustle. Silence became my fortress, my sanctuary. No more need to justify, explain, or beg for understanding. I tore to shreds the invisible chains that had forged me into an eternal mother, guardian, savior. Yes, children are flesh of my flesh, a part of me, but not the masters of my destiny. And when they grow up and offer only contempt in return for love, the heart has the right to rebel, to heal. I started attending classes for seniors. Not to fill the void, not to escape from myself, but to nourish myself with life. Painting, and now the brush in my hand paints a world full of colors. Gentle yoga, and the body, bound by years, regains flexibility. Gardening, and the earth comes alive under my fingers. I was surprised by myself, not so much by the new skills, but by the inner transformation that was happening to me. I was healing my soul, healing wounds, giving myself the right to happiness. No longer Evelyn Thompson, Mom. Just Evelyn Thompson. And that turned out to be enough. One day, in class, a colleague asked if I had children. I froze for a moment, as if searching for words, and then exhaled. "I used to have one. Now I have a whole world." There was no pity in her eyes, only admiration. "What courage," she whispered, "to say that without a trace of guilt." I smiled, feeling the burden of pretense fall away. No more need to portray the perfect mother, an image that was held only by my sacrifice. That evening, I took out a new notebook. Black cover, crisp pages. And I wrote in large letters, "Today I declare myself free. Free from the expectations of others, from fear, from emotional blackmail. Today is my rebirth. Not a fresh start, but a start with myself." I closed the notebook, hid it under my pillow, and fell into a sleep I hadn't known for ages. Lightness throughout my body, anticipation of the freedom to manage my time, and a kind of intoxicating feeling of life, bursting with energy. Almost a month, not a sound. Not a single call. Complete, ringing silence. And instead of the usual pain, peace. It was as if an unbearable burden had fallen from my shoulders. By letting go of my son, I was finally able to straighten my shoulders and breathe deeply. It was agonizing to admit, but the truth was staring me in the face. I was better off without him. One day, in the middle of the day, at a bustling farmer's market, an acquaintance called out to me. Surprise was written all over her face. "You're glowing," she said, and her words were a revelation. I really had changed. It was reflected in every movement, in the sparkle in my eyes, in the lightness of my gait. As if having shed the unbearable burden of someone else's guilt, I was floating above the ground. That day, I decided to take another step. Parting with a few old but soulless jewels, I bought a ticket to a charming town, the city of my dreams. Traveling alone no longer instilled fear. Wandering through its cobbled streets, inhaling the aroma of freshly baked bread, I sat down on a bench to see off the sunset. Time seemed to stand still, giving me a second chance. It was then, admiring the crimson sunset sinking into the mountains, that I realized, I hadn't lost my son. I had regained the woman who existed before him, the one who knew how to dream, laugh, and take care of herself. I felt in my skin how the end of one chapter inevitably opens another, the one where my name is finally written in large letters. My return from the trip was marked not only by an overflowing suitcase filled with souvenirs, pictures, and fresh impressions. No, the treasure was inside, a renewed world. With what incredible ease I now uttered that short but so important no, and not a trace of guilt. Previously, I lived revolving in the orbit of other people's desires, striving to please, to serve, to give myself completely. Now, my inner compass pointed in a completely different direction, self-respect. One morning, while enjoying fragrant coffee on a sun-drenched patio, I received a letter. The handwriting was shaky, betraying the writer's agitation. It was a letter from my son. Not a sincere repentance, but rather a desperate plea, artfully disguised as remorse. He complained about failures, about his wife leaving him, about unsuccessful job searches. And at the end, a phrase that pierced me to the core, "Mom, please, help me one more time." Tears didn't flow from my eyes, I didn't break down. But a wave of compassion rose within me. Not for him. For the woman I once was. For the mother who would have rushed to help without hesitation, with an open heart, not thinking about herself. And then it dawned on me, to return now would mean betraying myself, succumbing to inertia, not love. It would be cruel to both of us. After all, true love sometimes requires the ability to let go, to maintain distance. That night, in the flickering candlelight, I offered a silent prayer for him, and then, with firm resolve, I burned the letter. No malice, just determination. There was no hatred in my heart, but neither was there a desire to repeat the past. Our paths had diverged. And as bitter as it is to admit, my path became brighter and more beautiful when I freed myself from the burden of his load. Since the ashes scattered, he hasn't tried to contact me. The phone went silent, and the door to my past remained tightly closed. Perhaps it looked sad from the outside, but a long-awaited freedom reigned in my soul. Every minute of silence was like a gentle touch to my wounded soul, giving me a space where there is no room for demands and manipulation. Finally, I found what I had been denied for many years, peace. I dedicated myself to caring for the flowers in the small garden of my house. Each planted seed was a symbol of a buried dream, a forgotten need, a lost part of myself. Watching them grow, I suddenly realized a simple truth: even on abandoned land you can bloom. It's never too late to put down fresh roots, even if the soil is scarred. A neighbor persuaded me to give a small report at the local community center, before a gathering of older women. At first, I resisted, shame held me back. What can I teach them? But she was adamant, your story is invaluable. And I decided. That day I walked into the hall, trembling with excitement, and shared my truth. At the end of the speech, women approached me, their eyes full of tears. Please, help me, one of them whispered, squeezing my hand. I also raised an ungrateful son, but until today I couldn't find the strength to let him go. Returning home that evening, I felt needed in a completely new way. Not because I was cooking or cleaning, but because I was sharing my pain, turning it into a message of hope. I realized that pain doesn't disappear in silence, it recedes before conversation, embrace, and forgiveness. And I felt ready to finally turn this page of my life. The next time I crossed the threshold of the community center, I was no longer trembling. They were waiting for me. They greeted me with smiles, questions, a thirst to hear echoes of their lives in my words. Each time I shared my story, a tiny crack in my soul seemed to healing. The pain of memories receded, giving way to a quiet sadness. I spoke not from the depths of a bleeding wound, but from the point of a healed scar. And for a woman as scarred by life as I was, it was a real miracle. One day I was invited to a support group. Women of age gathered there, each with a similar burden, ungrateful children, indifferent husbands, years stolen by silence. We looked at each other with tenderness and deep understanding. We didn't need long explanations. A fleeting gesture, a dropped phrase, was enough to understand the depth of someone else's pain. There was not a drop of condemnation between us, only all-consuming sympathy. It was there, in this circle of support, that I had a realization that shook me to the core. I was not alone in my trouble, not the first and, unfortunately, not the last. But I could become a voice for those who are still drowning in silence, living proof that starting life anew is possible. That letting go of the past is not a sign of weakness, but a manifestation of love for oneself in its purest and most sincere form. That night, standing in front of the mirror, I saw a completely different woman in the reflection. No longer elderly and exhausted, not used and devastated. I saw myself. I met her, a survivor, an embodiment of resilience and serenity. My heart trembled, and I, touching my chest, whispered to myself, "You are no longer alone, Evelyn Thompson. You will never be alone again." And with that thought, with my head held high,